Don't apologise. What will you do? Will you record the answers and then just...
yeah, this is being taped. This is being taped right now, and a different person will actually translate it.
Okay, fine.
You are now located in Turkey. What sort of influence has this had on you as a musician?
As a musician, I think it was quite a difficult period at first, moving here in terms of the change in social sort of environment in terms of learning a new language, and it kind of scrambled me quite nicely in a way, and it defocused me in a way that was quite positive, as it turns out. But at the time, it felt a little bit uncomfortable. And what I mean by that is that it's sort of obviously living in Turkey really is nothing like living in London or anywhere in the West in a sense. So it sort of gave me forced me into a kind of space where I didn't have the usual crutches of music culture, of media influence, of just I mean, once you move, you get a clarity, and you get a perspective on the kind of the conditioned responses that you build when you live in a certain place, like England for a long time. It's sort of deconditioned that, if you like. So I was in a new sort of new space, really, quite sort of. I didn't quite know whether I really. Whether my work would really necessarily be, I don't know, whether it was based on, whether the reasons for doing writing music were simply because of a sort of an attachment to an idea of being in rock and roll, as it were, being a musician and being a rock musician. It's difficult to explain, really, but at the end of it, I think the album, the set of songs that we came up with, Paul and I, from Turkey, and it wasn't necessarily, they're certainly not influenced by the Turkish musical culture, but from that sort of place of isolation, if you like, dislocation. The songs really have a sort of a different quality to them, which is much more open, less self-conscious, and quite unashamedly melodic and direct.
Do you think that one of the objectives in moving to Turkey was to sort of disorientate, or as you were implying, to reorientate yourself?
Well, that was probably underlying. I mean, it was an entirely practical move. My wife's Turkish. We moved here for totally practical reasons. My wife's a choreographer. She's an artist in her own right, and she was commissioned to start the first ever national contemporary dance company of Turkey. It's a state company. So those were the sort of the reasons, if you like, practical reasons. But yes, I mean, underlying that, one of the reasons that I willingly agreed to come to Turkey was partly because of that, partly that roving, that nomadic nature. I mean, when you're a musician and you do get the luck to tour and be able to make your life out of making music, you enter a kind of lifestyle that delocates you anyway. So there's a nomadic quality develops. Now, if you're comfortable with that, well, then it makes it easier to deal with that sort of moving around and that travelling. But if you're not comfortable with that, it's probably when you'd stop doing it in a way. So, I mean, moving here was very attractive because of that. Because of, yes, I'd agree. It was an exciting idea to come to an unknown situation, which presented with it, unseen possibilities in a way.
And had you wanted to also maybe scrap everything you had built up or had been associated with you thus far? Did you want to start anew?
No, not at all. Absolutely not. I mean, I think that's always happening. That process is happening anyway. In day to day, I think I'm, I mean, the past is relevant to a certain extent as a means of measuring, but it's certainly not something that I'm attached to. Last week isn't even. It's all about now and all about. So that's not very very important for me. That idea of renewal and music. I think it's just when I write songs, it's from a very sort of quiet, silent place. It's from a place that's at a constant, if you like. Mm-hmm. So it's just the colours on the outside change, really.
Mm-hmm. Maybe you could elaborate a little bit more on what you were saying about how the songs were more melodic than before.
Well, I'm just as much an observer as that, as anybody. I mean, I'm just as much of an audience member. I mean, when you write songs, they come. And, of course, all those, subconscious, emotional elements that go to making a musician make a choice on a certain direction in terms of mood, in terms of the chord structures and melodic structures and lyric content. They're all very much in this substrata, if you like. They're not always very evident. I mean, these songs, once they were written, were just coming out. There was a much more melodic onus to it. I mean, I definitely consciously wanted to simplify and be in an effort to communicate something. I mean, people, I was aware that a lot of people are quite sort of confused by my lyrics, which I quite like. I think that's quite appropriate in a way. But I thought, okay, let me try and be a bit clearer about certain things and write in a way that was still lyrically, that is, but that was still had that integrity of the stylistic quality, mm-hmm. but I wanted to clarify notions a bit more, and so that all those things started to come about. And the songs, once they were written, were that I wrote more songs. It was a much more prolific period. They were written over 16, maybe 6 months, and I don't know. I think it's just a very sort of open album. It's very unself-conscious in a way.
This is wholly inappropriate for a guy who likes to keep his readers of the lyrics confused. However, there's a question here about the song "Gliding Like a Whale," where you're talking about gliding like a whale in and out of a hotel. The interviewer wants to know if this is in reference to your wanderlust.
Yes, it is a bit like that, and it's also it's quite an abstract lyric, really, based on quite an abstract notion, and that is, there's a wanderlust aspect to it. It was really, I was musing about the idea of when we tour, and it's quite an intense situation. You're not stopping. It's physically intense. It's psychologically intense, and it's almost like an unbearable load, really, to complete. And there's a point where you reach almost like a transcending point. You transcend that physical barrier and the mental barrier and the creative barrier, and it just glides. It sort of seems to take over. Something else seems to take over, and this energy comes from somewhere, which is also related to the performance and can affect the performance very positively. And I was also thinking about another separate idea of being two places in one time, at one time, which is quite an abstract thing, and just writing around that in a very abstract way. in a way that maybe, you know, a lot of Brian Eno's songy albums, like Under the Green World, Taking Tiger Mountain by Strategy, those lyrics had a quality that were almost like nonsense, but were intriguing line by line rather than verse by verse, as it were.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a kind of lyrical approach.
So there is quite a bit of experimentation in what you do lyrically, then. That there's experimentation.
Yes, yeah, of course. I mean, it's always like that. I mean, it's almost like there are some lyrics which pass through the head, if you like,
mm-hmm.
and some which simply come out in a very a way that's sort of quite visceral and quite organic and quite instinctive and quite automatic, if you like,
mm-hmm.
based on a notion. And sometimes I'll clarify them a little and adjust them and edit them and bring out maybe a meaning which maybe is evident in that sort of sketch, as it were. But sometimes the sketch is left in that sort of unrefined state, if you like,
mm-hmm.
quite, because they work as, you know, lyrics also work when they're in context of music as a song. They take on another quality when they're sung. So that's another way of reaching a decision on a lyric.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes, you know, you can sing ABC with a certain attitude, and you can sing the alphabet with a certain attitude and communicate something, I think, through
mm-hmm.
through the intention of the voice. So there's all those sort of things going on when I'm writing lyrics. I write lyrics often in a very musical way.
Mm-hmm.
You know, in in the same way that a chord structure will have a very visceral effect
mm-hmm.
on something, on a listener,
mm-hmm.
and that's me included. Lyrics can be like that.
And getting back to this idea of wanderlust, do you think you always are in sort of search of an are you in search of the ideal place? Are you dissatisfied with the reality of your surroundings?
No, I think I use the surroundings to maybe remind me that, you know, the ideal place is where you are,
mm-hmm.
and you know, the surroundings are not that important.
Mm-hmm.
So that one is so rather than being like a wanderlust, which is looking for something exteriorly, I think it's more about that I'm very comfortable wherever I am.
Mm-hmm. Well, it must mean you're very well adjusted.
Well, I think it's you know, engagement with the different environments is part and parcel of achieving that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a bit like being well travelled, if you like. That old adage of being well travelled, it breaks down a lot of preconceptions. It's very educational in terms of living with different cultures and different attitudes.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, finally you can sort of synthesize it all, hopefully, and see how there really is no difference
mm-hmm.
on any level, either with people or with the environment, or you know, all the changes are these sort of personality ways of the personalities of let's say the culture that you live in, you know, the way that they deal with the same problems.
Mm-hmm. Tell us about the 3-year blank that transpired before the release of this record. We've been told that you had been sort of mainly taking care of your kids or your family during that time. What is that?
Well, for the first 6 or 7 months, after we moved, yes, I took care of my family totally, which is what I do anyway most of the time when I'm not working. I mean, most of my work, I call it. If somebody asks me what I do, I'm a father first, and a musician now and again. And but I think I can sort of channel properly, appropriately, the correct sort of the necessary energies needed to do both. But I was there. I was looking after the kids for a couple of months, 7 months, half a year or so, and then I started. I mean, it wasn't totally blank. I was writing. I moved here in '92. I was writing early '93. By the end of '93, by autumn of '93, the songs were ready, and it just took me a couple of months, 3 months actually, to find the right team that I wanted to work with. And then we started recording in early '94, so it wasn't really that long. I was only sort of out really for 7 months, really.
It's extraordinary that you would call yourself a father, first of all, because people are not generally given to look at it that way.
Sure, but that's the way of the audience. I mean, that's rock and roll, isn't it? That's fame and media and.
Well, not only rock and roll. I think in the real world as well. I mean, people see themselves as wearing maybe several hats, and fatherhood is maybe one of those. In your particular case, why the commitment? Why the dedication?
Well, I can't explain. I would say why lesser dedication. I don't understand where that question comes. Why the dedication? I say why not? In the most profound terms.
Well,
I mean, sorry.
Is that reflective of the type of family you were brought up in, or is it something you wanted to change? Like, for example, you wanted to be different from the way your father actually was, or?
I think I respect my parents eminently, but I think one's own parenthood is peppered with influence, positive and those things that you learn not to do as a result of your own experience are not necessarily your parents' faults, but positive lessons in what not to do. So they're lessons, they're positive aspects in themselves. So I mean, parenthood is just at one time it's a great lesson in in focusing away from your own needs and totally devoting and being a servant, if you like, which I think is a very valuable activity. And it's one of altruism and being a father for me was one of those direct experiences of the heart, if you like, and by the heart I mean a very sort of powerful opener of like an essential part of you, the reflector. And this, of course, feeds it. All of my music, of course, it does, but it's not necessarily necessary to talk about it in those terms. It just is like that. And parenthood also presents you with the delicate problem and question of attachment and ownership of people over another person. And I think that there's a great value in learning that in the facing the fact that you don't own those children and are not a master of them, but you're almost your student, if you like, of them. So it's very sort of valuable, the experience, I mean, through that practical, very difficult. It's almost like very disciplined. Having to serve 24 hours a day it's a school in itself. So that's the sort of approach that I take, and it's a delightful school. It has that sort of inescapable attraction of primal love and attachment to these things, but it's teaching you about non-attachment and about service and about total dedication. Anyway, so I think that's a very valuable thing. I think that it's very easy to transfer those sort of attachments and energies elsewhere in terms of being a workaholic and blah 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 blah. But with children, there's something special about it. There's something very difficult as well.
Do you think that you had a very happy or idyllic childhood by virtue of your parents' dedication? Is that something you carry with you?
We all do, I think. I think we all sort of really, behind the psychological array of psychological so-called scars we assume that we've inherited from our parents. I think if you look behind that, there's a great need for parents and respect them. I mean, my childhood wasn't idyllic, but that's not my parents' fault wholly. Nobody's child. I think the growing up as a human being, facing reality. Nobody's child. I think the growing up as a human being, facing reality is difficult in itself, and I think what you're left with is. I mean, there's a point where I in my teens blamed my parents for a lot of my problems, but the older I got, the more I realised that those problems were inherent and were something that were valuable fuel for me to be not a balanced person, but be the kind of person that I should be, I suppose, whatever that means.
On the album jacket, the interviewer notes that there seems to be a new Peter Murphy, a more relaxed, a more casual Peter Murphy.
Well, the Peter Murphy shown on the cover is an old Peter Murphy from 7 years of age.
Right, exactly.
I think he's probably the same bloke, really.
I think there was. It says on the there's a photo of you and your childhood on the back, and
one in the middle.
Yeah, that's right. It says your facial expression though looks a lot more casual, a lot more loose, relaxed than before. Are you less concerned with putting up a front or a facade now? Or
well, that is a kind of front too, in a way. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't assume to be perfect, and I wouldn't presume and so that I was perfectly. No, I mean that's a sort of a facade too. I think those things we do are a facade. I think, but yeah, I mean that photograph's very simple, and it's not too. It looks like it's not too involved with image, but actually it is in a way, because that's something that I wanted to portray.
You wanted to portray.
So it's still very much using image, really.
So what exactly did you want to portray? What she's reading into this of a person who is more relaxed and at home with himself and less concerned with what other people think.
Sort of, yeah. I mean, I don't know. I just wanted the person to photograph me naturally, and hopefully that's and I don't know. I'll look at it and tell you later. I don't know really.
Okay, well that's fine. You don't have to answer every question.
No, but I mean that's essential too. I didn't want to be too. So I didn't want to. I just wanted to be photographed naturally, and also there is a side to my music that is not as different sort of types of songs that I've written in the past, which people may call heavy and dark. There's a lot of light there, if you like, to use a simplification. It's very, there's a lot of, I'm a good guy.
Okay. Here's a rather presumptuous observation that the interviewer asks. She asks whether or not this is viable. She says that maybe in the past you were more obsessed with the idea of creating something different, whereas now your music seems to be a little more. You seem to be a little more comfortable with the idea of making pop music that's more accessible. It's more universally accessible. Is that a viable observation?
No, I mean, to be very honest, I think, whenever I'm making a song, I think every song is universally accessible and acceptable. I'm not in the business of making pop music for pop's sake, for its own sake. I want to be moved by the songs that I make. It isn't that contrived what I do. Mm-hmm. It's quite innocent, really, quite naive in a sense. Mm-hmm. And these songs just happened that way. Mm-hmm. I know that's a very sort of unsatisfying question, and it's interesting the analysis that you just told me of the journalist. I think the things that she said about my music are really what she's reading into it. Mm-hmm. So she's talking about herself, I think.
Well, that's often the way these interviews work. You learn more about the interviewer than you do about the interviewee.
Yeah, but that's not necessarily negative. I'm just saying, I think, she's obviously reading things into it which interest her, which she'll probably want to, which she probably sees. Mm-hmm. And perceives herself. And it isn't always the case that the artist is necessarily doing those things in a way. But that's all the beauty of music, really, because I think music itself leaves you with yourself. Mm-hmm. In the end. Mm-hmm. That's the, it really does in a very affirmative way, and that the mistake is to attribute those experiences with the actual musician, but it's the musician's involved, of course, there, but the person, the listener, just gets off on it in his own way. Mm-hmm. In a sense.
Speaking of your past here, there's a question about Bauhaus, and in retrospect, what was it to you? Was it a step you had to go through? Was it sort of the flowering of youth, or was it something maybe you, in retrospect, are proud of or not proud of, or how exactly do you see Bauhaus?
I'm a very, I've got a very large 70% sentimental memory of that band and impression of that band. For me, it was an explosion of creativity. It was probably it was one of that kind of band that happens 1 in a million, and was a great art house in terms of working in very experimental ways that taught me. I mean, I went into that band knowing nothing about making music, with just a pure talent. And what was fascinating was the atmosphere that we created as a band allowed that to come through in a very pure, uninterrupted way. That was what was valuable about it, and it was such a great. What a Bauhaus meant, workhouse, and it was a great education for all of us in that we were very free and very not, what do you call it, experimental. That's a term which suggest that we consciously wanted to be experimental, but no, it wasn't like that. The nature of the way that we worked came from a very pure space, if you like.
Mm-hmm.
But the content itself and the form, thank you, was obviously developing in itself, and it was a reflection on our own, states, if you like,
mm-hmm.
our own sort of point to life. It was development in itself. So I think it was fine. There's all those sort of egoic memories, personality memories of we were there were the human things where there were difficulties and there were tensions and everything else. But it was, the first 3 years were marvelous.
Mm-hmm. I guess in retrospect also maybe it's the kind of thing that only young bands can get away with. There was sort of
I think so. I think it's down to that wonderful innocence,
mm-hmm.
a wonderful naivety.
Right.
But there's a if you can retain that sense of that purity after knowledge, if you like, you know what I mean, after experience,
mm-hmm.
well, that can be valuable. I think it was a very mature. It had a lot of mature qualities about it, and the people, we as a band, had a lot of mature qualities which we weren't conscious of,
mm-hmm.
and that was part of the reason. That was probably part of the reason why we couldn't really clarify that, which would have been under, if you like, allow those qualities to be understood consciously to the point where we could have stayed together
mm-hmm.
in a positive way. And that's just a very typical analysis of, I suppose that's quite a bit of a typical analysis of why marriages split or friendships split or bands split, you know what I mean? Because bands are very much like a marriage.
20/20 hindsight.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I guess for better or worse, you have been since labeled as sort of the Godfather or the King of Goth. Is that an image that comes back to haunt you, or is it something you take with a grain of salt?
Well, a bit of a grain of salt. I still think it's the sort of the concentrated lowest common denominator of what Bauhaus was.
Mm.
And it was not really gothic. I mean, it's sort of like the lowest common denominator has become the essential description of a band called Bauhaus. But it depends what's meant by goth, really. I don't know.
Well, maybe
it was a very, very, very theatrical. It was. I remember Paul Morley wrote a biog for my last album, and he said Bauhaus thought they were the Velvets gone holy, but they were in fact sweet gone mouldy, which I thought was quite good, really. I mean, we were sort of there's a grotesque part to us, but there was this part. It was a jumble of sort of beauty and ugliness, but where it was beautiful, it was sublime. I mean, if we were we were one of the bands who probably, I feel, if you caught us on a good night, which was 60% of the time, we were the best band around at that time, and for a long time. There was something happened at our gigs that was very, very special, and that wasn't dark. It was very beautiful. So that whole sort of cliche image of that dark. It was certainly not occultic, and in the passion of the latter-day goth bands, as it were, and they're more goth than Bauhaus were in a sense. But where it was ugly, it was also very scary, and people liked that too. It was like the best sort of horror movie. know, it was sort of a very unleashed power, if you like, which we didn't really understand, but it sort of came through.
So, do you think there are any qualities from Bauhaus that are just sort of gone for good that you will not be able to revive or recreate it again?
No, I think they're the positive. I think it's understanding those qualities and refining them into a much more abstract state. You know, into a much more refined way of working. Really, I mean, the performance element's always there. I think what I've done since then is really found my voice as a singer, and to such an extent that I've got much more to sing, if you like, you know. As a performer, I'm aging. I mean, I was, if you like a stunning performer physically as well as anything else. Now I'm getting older. I think that will become much more subtle and less focused on an exteriorized form, you know.
Are there any concrete plans for a live performance?
Yeah. I'm going to be auditioning in a couple of weeks' time, and we'll be going to America to do some live performance promotion, and we're working up a tour now.
What sort of staging do you have in mind? What sort of shows?
Pardon?
What sort of shows do you have in mind? Will it just be standard singer and band, or?
Well, it was always that, even with Bauhaus, but there was something else there, wasn't there? There was something special there, and I think that something special is still there.
This question here about what makes you happiest right now? When are you happiest as just a person?
When I don't leave a bad mark on the situation, and that makes me good.
when you haven't screwed up.
Or, you know, if I haven't hurt somebody, or if I haven't sort of said the wrong thing to you and been sort of arrogant, or, you know, full of bullshit. That makes me happy.
How about just in day-to-day life? What are the little things that make your day?
Well, when I haven't left a bad mark, and when I haven't dealt any bullshit out, the same.
There was talk about you quitting music for a while. Is that true?
I always quit. Every time I finish an album, I quit. It's just exhausting and sort of mind-boggling. But I quit to sort of to give myself the sort of kick in the butt to get me back into it again, because I get myself scared again. I put myself in a position where I think, right, that's it. I've finished, and I have to renew my approach. It's just a device to give myself a feeling of renewal. But that's not. Excuse me, I'm losing my English because I'm speaking Turkish most of the time, and I'm really becoming my vocabulary is really reduced. What's the word for it? To get a what is it? To refresh myself, really.
Right. But what is it that brings you back to music, though? I mean, at the end of the day, I guess you must think to yourself, well,
because I love singing, really, and I love making a song up, and it's just being affected by it and being moved by it, and it's a wonderful thing to do, really.
But career-wise, I mean, as a musician, you've gone through a pretty dramatic move, leaving the UK and all. I can't think of many.
No, it's not dramatic. I can. I mean, this is a small world. I can go to America in 4 hours.
Is that right? Okay. But,
no, actually, no. It's 11 hours from Turkey.
But are there any musicians you look up to as, say, mentors, people whose path you would like to sort of emulate?
Well, not past, but I'd love to. I think Robert Fripp made a big mistake working with David Sylvian. He should have worked with me. But that's a joke. I love Robert Fripp's guitaring. I think he's got this quality which is sort of, when you hear it, you're off somewhere else. It's not just a guitar player. I'd love to be Brian Eno for a day.
In what way?
But not because actually not. I assume that he was much wiser than he is actually. But I think his early albums, that early set of ambient albums, are so brilliant. They're so seminal. They're so unmatched now. So I'd like to get into that space really, and to try and find that sort of ease, if you like, that breadth of that palette.
But what do you think can help you achieve that state, though? Is that something people just sort of get with experience, or is it
just an attitude?
Attitude.
An attitude, and I think it's just being as open as possible to any. Being very, very simple and very sort of. It's to do with simplicity. And that's why I haven't really taught myself anything about music. I still don't know how to play. I can only just about play the guitar, some chords, and fumble around with one finger with a keyboard. But I get what I want. But that's partly because I sort of love the idea of total simplicity, and partly because I'm lazy. But really, I mean, you can make it. Doesn't have a song doesn't have to be loaded with thousands of chords.
Having separated from the 100 Men, or I guess disbanding the 100 Men, was it tough for you to readjust to a new set of players on this most recent album?
No, that was partly the burning of the bridges. That was that new thing. And the band, I love them. I really respect them, and they're my mates. But they wanted to go and do their own thing too. It had been 7 years, so that was fine. So Turl, the drummer, has just recorded his own album, which apparently is very good, which I'm really pleased about. And he's having a baby too, incidentally. So that's another very good, very important move. Peter, the guitar player, made his own album, but he's also a social worker, which is brilliant. He's working with mentally ill people, music therapy, which is fantastic. And Eddie's going to come back into the band, which is brilliant. And Paul Statham. They're still in place. So.
But you talk about having to burn the bridges, though.
It was it was partly that the band had seen its own course anyway. When I was very passive, I allowed the band total freedom. I kept them on a retainer for 7 years, but I said, whatever you want to do, go and do it. And basically, they had the freedom to develop and the time to investigate different possibilities, which Turl did. For instance, the drummer in the last 3 years was experimenting with other different bands in his free time, and finally, found a band that he really, really, really liked and had felt more commitment to than my band, which was something I was very pleased to have been able to allow him to do. And so it was very sort of, I was pleased that he'd found that, really, because that's very important for a musician. It's a nightmare if you feel trapped in any situation. And it was good that he was able to do that. He was able to do that, and it wasn't like a split. It was just like, okay, that's your next thing,
Well, clearly, I guess your dealings with the 100 Men have been amicable. How about the Love and Rockets project? How did you look at that?
Well, that's been going since 1981 or something, isn't it? I think I don't know. I think I think both the camps actually feel frustrated and watch with interest the different development, and I felt that they'd reached a point of success with that last album with So Alive on it, that they should have followed it up a bit more quickly. instead they split up again in effect for 2 years sabbatical, or 3 years, or I don't know, I think it was 4 years since that album. And it's a shame that they didn't carry on really quickly. I think they're going to find it difficult to communicate their talent. You know.
You speak as though you haven't been in direct touch with them, though.
Oh yeah, I do. Yeah, I mean, David plays me the albums once they're recorded and stuff. It's all fine. No problem.
Getting back to your record here, there's a question about this last song, Huvola?
No, that's the second last song, I hope.
Okay.
On your tape.
Well, she says it's the last, but maybe.
Well, that's what. Do you have a CD in front of you?
No, I've just got the questions here. But she was asking.
Huvola, yeah. Okay.
She was asking what does this mean? Huvola.
Huvola. Who is who? Well, it's a song to my children, and it's what do you call it when you make up a word out of vowel sounds of other words?
Make up a word out of vowel sounds of other words?
You know where you scramble a word and you reconstitute it in its correct order. That thing, anyway. It's one of them, and it contains the parts of my children's names with another aspect to it, added to it. And it also sounds like it's one of those brilliant sounding, very singable choruses.
What is the other aspect added to it?
Well, Huvola. They've all got qualities of perfection. There's Hu, which is a quality of perfection in Arabic. And Vo, which has the vowel sounds actually that Vo alludes to grace, if you like, and La is the creator. So there's those qualities to it, and my children's names actually contain those sounds.
I see. And the song, let me see, Wish. There's a song on the album Wish. Wish I Was.
That's not on the album. That's on a single.
It's on a single.
I hope so. I mean,
well, I think
the reason I'm balking here is because on my last album, Beggars sent. On Deep in 1990, the Japanese copy of the album was missing the last song because of some miscommunication. And the fact that you said Huvola's the last song is not. And I'm just worrying that the same nightmare hasn't happened again, and that Wish isn't on the album. It's on a CD4, which is like an EP, which was released with the single on it. So anyway,
yeah. Well, the question.
Don't know about that.
Yeah, the question is about Wish, and it seems to be about a sort of an all-enveloping kind of love.
Yeah, it's about. I wish she should read the lyrics. I mean,
she has the
that's
lyrics.
what it's about.
She was
I wish it was spring. I wish it was your house. I wish we'd invite the beggars begging at your front fence. I wish I was your tree. I wish we could bend and bow like the branch of ash, burn idols for love.
Right.
So it's a slavish, burning love, really, for your beloved, and it's describing the qualities of total humiliation in the best possible sense.
She asked, though, is the fact that you wrote this song indicative of some sort of change within you, or is this?
No, I mean, there's a song on a very early album called Love Hysteria, which is called My Last 2 Weeks, and all my songs are about my beloved, really. ultimately.
Mm-hmm. I see. Now, there's a very strange...
Isn't that, Steve, somebody's going to ring now. I've got my next phoner.
Okay.
And they're going to be ringing from South Africa.
Oh, okay.
I'm afraid we're going to have to cut it now.
Yeah, no problem. I think we've basically covered all we need to cover. So
okay.
That would be fine, Peter.
All right. Good luck to you.
Yeah, same to you.
Nice talking to you.
Okay, bye.
Bye-bye, man. Don't apologise. What will you do? Will you record the answers and then just...
yeah, this is being taped. This is being taped right now, and a different person will actually translate it.
Okay, fine.
You are now located in Turkey. What sort of influence has this had on you as a musician?
As a musician, I think it was quite a difficult period at first, moving here in terms of just the change in social sort of environment in terms of learning a new language, and it kind of scrambled me quite nicely in a way, and it defocused me in a way that was quite positive, as it turns out. But at the time, it felt a little bit uncomfortable. And what I mean by that is that it's sort of obviously living in Turkey really is nothing like living in London or anywhere in the West in a sense. So it sort of gave me forced me into a kind of space where I didn't have the usual crutches of music culture, of media influence, of just once you move, you get a clarity, and you get a perspective on the kind of the conditioned responses that you build when you live in a certain place, like England for a long time. It's sort of deconditioned that, if you like. So I was in a new sort of new space, really, quite sort of. I didn't quite know whether I really whether my work would really necessarily be. I don't know whether it was based on whether the reasons for doing writing music were simply because of a sort of an attachment to an idea of being in rock and roll, as it were, being a musician and being a rock musician. It's difficult to explain, really, but at the end of it, I think the album, the set of songs that we came up with, Paul and I, from Turkey, and it wasn't necessarily, they're certainly not influenced by the Turkish musical culture, but from that sort of place of isolation, if you like, dislocation, the songs really have a sort of a different quality to them, which is much more, there's a nomadic quality develops. Now, if you're comfortable with that, well, then it makes it easier to deal with that sort of moving around and that travelling. But if you're not comfortable with that, it's probably when you'd stop doing it in a way. So, I mean, moving here was very attractive because of that. Because of, yes, I'd agree, it was an exciting idea to come to an unknown situation, which presented with it, unseen possibilities in a way.
And had you wanted to also maybe scrap everything you had built up or had been associated with you thus far, did you want to start anew?
No, not at all. Absolutely not. I mean, I think that's always happening. That process is happening anyway. In day to day, I think the past is relevant to a certain extent as a means of measuring, but it's certainly not something that I'm attached to. Last week isn't even. It's all about now and all about. So that's not very very important for me. That idea of renewal and much more open, less self-conscious album, and quite unashamedly melodic and direct.
Do you think that one of the objectives in moving to Turkey was to sort of disorientate, or as you were implying, to reorientate yourself?
Well, that was probably underlying. I mean, it was an entirely practical move. My wife's Turkish. We moved here for totally practical reasons. My wife's a choreographer. She's an artist in her own right, and she was commissioned to start the first ever national contemporary dance company of Turkey. It's a state company. So those were the sort of the reasons, if you like, practical reasons. But yes, I mean, underlying that, one of the reasons that I willingly agreed to come to Turkey was partly because of that roving nature, that nomadic nature. I mean, when you're a musician and you do get the luck to tour and be able to make your life out of making music, you enter a kind of lifestyle that delocates you anyway. Mm-hmm. So your music, I think, it's just when I write songs, it's from a very sort of quiet, silent place. It's from a place that's at a constant, if you like. Mm-hmm. So it's just the colours on the outside change, really.
Mm-hmm. Maybe you could elaborate a little bit more on what you were saying about how the songs were more melodic than before.
Well, I'm just as much an observer as anybody. I mean, I'm just as much of an audience member. I mean, when you write songs, they come. And, of course, all those, subconscious, emotional elements that go to making a musician make a choice on a certain direction in terms of mood, in terms of the core structures and melodic structures and lyric content. They're all very much in this substrata, if you like. They're not always very evident. I mean, these songs, once they were written, were just coming out. There was a much more melodic onus to it. I mean, I definitely consciously wanted to simplify and be in an effort to communicate something. I mean, people, I was aware that